Okay.
Feels like we were just here. But you look so different.
It's like Groundhog's Day.
It is.
I'm still wearing my podcasting socks.
Nice. Nice. They're very warm.
They are. That's the whole point. Alrighty. We don't really have an intro.
Who needs intros these days?
Intro? We're just jumping right in.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question from Rich on paleo and kids care. Rob, 2 questions for you. Is paleo a new term from your book Wired to Eat, or did someone make a huge error? I guess there is a typo in the book.
Apparently there's a typo in the book. I will put out there that it appears that the other 106,000 words were more or less correct. So...
Okay. So his question, what is your thought on kids care such as chiropractic treatment, massage, acupuncture, etc. when there are no obvious signs of issues, but more for general maintenance as they're always throwing themselves around? My kids are 4 and 7, much like ours are 4 and almost 7, and always throwing themselves around.
Well, and he said, don't let spelling slow you down.
Yeah.
I definitely won't because, Rich, you left out an S and the punctuation was horrible on this. So thanks. I don't know. I mean, neither of our kids have had chiropractic. I know some people are super geeked on it and like they want to do chiropractic adjustment right after the kid has come out of the birth canal. We were debating about even running this one. I don't know that I feel...
So we have chiropractor friends that have adjusted their kids from day one. And
literally day one.
And, you know, we haven't. But, I mean, I think it's really what speaks to you. Like, what if you feel strongly that chiropractic care helps you and massage helps you and acupuncture helps you, then and you want your kids to have that as well, I think that it's an individual thing. I mean, we also have friends whose kids get massages pretty regularly. Mm-hmm. I mean, it kind of just depends on your situation.
We've taught our kids, like, if they have a little bit of funky belly, mm-hmm. I've shown them some kind of tummy massage type mm-hmm. stuff. I've been working on teaching both the girls some breathing techniques when they're upset, or particularly if they get hurt, like they mm-hmm. crash their bike and skin their knee, trying to do like the 4 seconds in through the nose, hold, 8 seconds out through the mouth. And I got to say, Sagan is really good at it. Mm-hmm. Even though she's 4, she'll be crying. And I'm like, hey, let's do our breathing. And man, 3 breaths and she's cool. Zoe's a little harder to rein in. Like she does it, but it's a little harder to get her to kind of rein it in. So, I mean, we do some stuff like that, but I can't say that we've really ventured into these other areas. I know some people are super polarized one way or the other on this stuff. For me, chiropractic, I've definitely had huge benefit with things like twisted ribs and whatnot from doing jiu-jitsu. I look at it as physical medicine that can be really efficacious. I think some of it gets kind of woo. Like, I won't go into that too much as to what the woo is, but there's some of it that I think is a little out there. Chiros tend to be much better steeped in nutrition and lifestyle change and actually advocate for it, and have generally been much more open and welcoming to like paleo, ancestral health, low carb concepts. So in particular, whereas I would actually say that naturopaths in particular tend to be very kind of steeped in this vegan scene because all the schools are kind of pro-vegan. Not all of them are, but a lot of them are. Like the ones that aren't are kind of like bucking the trend, whereas like a little more consistency, like finding low carb, keto, paleo recommendations out of the chiropractor scene is pretty consistent, which is totally far afield from what the original question was around kids care. I mean, but around kid care, like we try to get our kids into bed pretty early. We try to feed them better more days than not. Try to keep them active. We consciously work to not overschedule them. So like they do 1 martial arts class a week, and that class time got changed. So technically they do no martial arts classes a week currently, but each day when they get home, we try to get them outside, you know, and riding their bikes or playing in the snow or, you know, something like that. So yeah, I feel like that's super important stuff. And then beyond that, we haven't really done a whole lot, which is a long meandering question. at the end of it, and probably doesn't provide much in the way of substance. But that's true of this whole thing. Yeah, we'll move on. Yeah.
All right, our second question is from Ed, and he says, "Hey Rob, I have a question regarding NMN, nicotinamide riboside, NAD+, etc. I've read and listened to several peeps like Peter Attia and guests like David Sinclair from Harvard, who tout the health benefits of NMN and NR for those of us who want to stay young. This is all fine and dandy. I mean, the number of people taking True Niagen is outstanding, me included. Then Chris Masterjohn, who I love, indicated on one of his podcasts that we should be careful taking NR and the like as it affects methylation. A bad thing, I think, with the possible suggestion of having to take an exogenous form of glycine to balance the negative effect of taking large doses of NMN NR products. Been listening to you for years and always remember you getting a bit pissed off that your listeners wouldn't do some research for themselves before submitting vocational questions. Well, I've tried to read and listen to everything there is, and I can't clear the wheat from the chaff. Maybe you can do a video or talk about this subject on your podcast."
Well, Ed, you did awesome due diligence on this, and honestly, if anything, what this illustrates, like, I would tend to lean towards all things nutrition, kind of out of the Chris Masterjohn camp. Like that guy just stitches things together in such an amazing way. His recent work looking at MTFR genes and methylation, and in particular looking at not riboside, riboflavin, as being kind of the critical linchpin element, requiring 3 to 5 milligrams per day, ideally getting the bulk of the riboflavin from dietary sources like liver. But a couple of thoughts here. I think that the notion, I'm going to back up. When we look at things like ketogenic diets and fasting, they tend to emulate a lot of what the benefits of this nicotinamide story is. We tend to shift metabolism towards a profile that looks more like that story. Supplementing our way there, I think, is very problematic, as I think Chris points out. And then similarly, the kind of snout to tail, well-managed nutrition that Chris recommends largely addresses these issues. Like if you're doing more than just muscle meat, you're getting that glycine balance, and you're also getting the micronutrients like riboflavin. And so things just kind of play out in the wash. So I think that this is where getting really micro scale on this stuff can be problematic. This is, I think, when people are looking both for health and the longevity story, like people like Michael Rose, Art Devaney, that look at a very macro level, I feel like they actually have more to provide oftentimes than these folks who are super down in the weeds looking at autophagy and all that stuff. All that stuff's great, and it's good to have a steeping in that. But then we have to kind of pull the focus back and just say, okay, well, what do we get clinically? Like if people do something that gives them better energy levels and better sleep, better performance, in general, that is going to mean good things going forward. And so I don't know if that 100% answers the question, but I definitely lean towards the notion that an appropriate glycemic load, leaning towards a ketogenic diet. I know Chris isn't a huge fan of ketogenic diets other than some more specific conditions, but if we look at just kind of the blood glucose response and match blood glucose response appropriate to our glycemic load, so straight out of like the 7-day carb test as part of Wired to Eat, I think that really good things come out of that. And then also keeping an eye on proper nutrition that's kind of a snout to tail orientation. Like we just at a macro level, we end up covering so much ground. We get so much good work done. This is maybe a little bit of a far afield point, but we've been working cross-side top at jiu-jitsu, and there's lots of different ways to do it. But the cross-side top that I've learned from Henry Akins, there's always a way of dealing with things. But this one method that he uses addresses so many things simultaneously that it kind of funnels people into a scenario where they only have a very limited number of options. And if you know what those options are, then you can respond to those and almost have a little bit of a game plan. Okay, if they do this, then I'll do that. And similarly, if we're handling our nutrition on a macro level, we don't need to get in and manage the micro details as much because they're just implicitly addressed.
Okay. So our next question is from Kyle about Dr. Gundry and the plant paradox. Kyle says, I am so curious what your thoughts are on this book in general and more Dr. Gundry's theory that we should eat around 22 grams of protein max per day and essentially around 60% carbs. Seems like a brilliant book full of testimonies, but his theories on animal product enzymes and heart health seem to be a little off to me, but I'm no expert. By the way, I'm a huge fan of your work. It has impacted my life immensely. I am the COO for a company called The Perfect Workout. I believe we both friends with Lawrence Neal, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome. So, yeah, the Plant Paradox is a cool book in some regards. It re-raises some questions around lectins in plants. And in the previous podcast, we had some question and commentary around folks not actually doing all that well with
leafy greens
and stuff, you know, and so that's dealing more, I would say, with fiber, although it can be some of these plant derived toxicants that for some people offer a hormetic stress benefit, and for other people may actually be problematic. Recommending 22 grams of protein max per day for anyone that is taller than 3 feet tall. Well, even children need more than this. Just is so ridiculous to me. Like, that is not even a snack size protein allotment. To get some mTOR activity, to get some of the benefits of branched chain amino acids in a single meal, you need more. You need about 25 grams of protein, and this will vary from size of person and whatnot. But I think that there's so much fear around this misnomer around cardiovascular disease, mTOR activation, inflammation. I just couldn't disagree more. And then as to the 60% carbs, I think that just depends. Some people are real carb tolerant. Some people are really not carb tolerant. And so you kind of have to play your fiddle based off of that. But again, I would really hang my hat on the, approximately 0.8 to 1.0 grams of protein per pound of lean body mass. For me, that equates to about 150 grams of protein a day. I tend to go a little slightly on the heavier side of that. You're about 120, 130 grams. And we both motor along really well with that. Not to say that anecdotal piece is super compelling, but the literature on effective aging, as we get older, the case is made that we should potentially be like as high as 1.2, 1.4 grams of protein per pound of lean body mass, because we tend to get a blunted anabolic response from protein. We tend to have a lower ability to digest protein. So there's an argument we should be eating more as we age, not less.
Doesn't Art Devaney say something like if you lose
40%
of your lean body mass,
you're dead.
You're dead.
Yeah. And, diabetes becomes fatal for a lot of reasons, but in part because of the wasting disease component. The difference between HIV and AIDS, to some degree, is this reality that AIDS is the initiation of a really gnarly wasting process. And aging is a wasting process. But the interesting caveat to that is that non-Westernized populations don't age the way that we do. And there's dietary factors, lifestyle factors, social factors. But one of the things that we can do to I would argue, age more effectively is to eat more protein. And really, and that doesn't mean that you need 6 meals a day with 50 grams of protein each time, unless you're like wanting to be a competitive powerlifter or bodybuilder or something like that. And even then, that may not be necessary. So even for a strength athlete, you don't necessarily need to have protein all the time. You don't always need mTOR turned on all the time, but you need some cyclical elements to that. And I think that that's really the important piece. I was trying to remember 10 and 2 topic. And one of the 10 and 2 topics that I wanted to hit is that it's not so much worrying about the absolute magnitude of protein that you have, but that we want some amount of on and off, and we want to cycle between those things. And again, hat tip to Art Devaney. He just at a very instinctive level, but also backing this up with his understanding of complex systems theory and stochastic processes. He has been a living example of this for a very long time, and I think emulates this process where you don't need to be overfed, but you certainly don't want to be underfed, and you want to lift some weights, and has produced a really effective kind of outcome with that.
Okay. Let's see. Our next question is on extended fasting and muscle loss from Keith. He says, Rob, how are you coming on your piece regarding fasting, mTOR, and aging strategies? I ask because I'm at a point in my health journey where I've lost the ugly weight, refocused on gaining muscle mass, and would now like to shed a little bit more fat to reveal the fruits of my labor. To do so, I've been planning on getting back to a strict ketogenic lifestyle, including a moderately aggressive fasting regimen. This is the same strategy I implemented during my initial 70-pound, 8-month weight loss that was largely inspired by the work of Jason Fung. I know you don't necessarily agree with Dr. Fung's opinions on fasting being a largely muscle-sparing venture, which is why I've been lurking in anticipation of your work on this topic. In my journey from 230 pounds to 160 pounds, I took part in daily intermittent fasts, frequent 36-hour fasts, and several fasts of 70 to 100 hours in duration. Based on this experience, I didn't encounter any noticeable effect on my strength or visible musculature, even as I got down to a modest body fat percentage in the mid-teens. With that being said, I'm very interested in the specifics of your views on extended fasting as a potential tool for cutting fat while preserving muscle, specifically as it would relate to hypertrophy-focused resistance training goals. A discussion between you and Dr. Fung on this topic would make for one incredibly interesting podcast. Thanks for your time and for all of your continued work. Your ability to interpret and convey complex topics is unsurpassed in this field.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. So I've noodled for, 5 years? I've had a file on a longevity book, and because I was foolish enough to write both the Keto Masterclass book and the sustainability book with Diana Rogers at the same time, I kind of freaked out and put most of the longevity stuff that I think matters in the Keto Masterclass book. There's still some other stuff that wasn't really germane to that topic, but I ended up talking a lot about mTOR and these pluses and minuses. And in the previous question, I kind of alluded to some of the stuff. Keith, I think a key thing to take away from this, and I'm inferring this from the way that you worded this stuff, but it sounds like you were doing resistance training during your fasted state, and that was a common feature throughout this whole story. And I would make the case that to the degree you maintained both muscle mass and strength during fasting, it had nothing to do with fasting and everything to do with the fact that you were strength training. There's some great studies that suggest that strength training, particularly daily strength training, full body, doesn't have to be a ton of work, but a decent amount of resistance will really forestall the lion's share of the tendency to lose muscle mass. Dr. Fung's a great dude. He's very smart. He's made some great contributions to the scene, but I think he's also been kind of fast and loose with it and hasn't really dug into some of the details in the literature. I think fasting is a great tool. It can be a fantastic modality. But again, if one is looking at that as ultimately a body composition endpoint as the goal, then the strength training, the resistance training has to be a key feature to that. So what we're introducing in that scenario then is very significant calorie restriction, enough of a pulse of anabolic stimulus from strength training that we're not totally losing, hopefully, a ton of muscle mass. And the fact that strength levels were largely maintained, as evidenced by your statement there, then that's probably a pretty good thing. Some of my challenge with fasting as kind of the primary modality for people to lose weight, and doesn't sound like this applies to you, but fasting is the absence of eating, and at some point that must stop, and then you need to eat again. And if we haven't created sound habits, whether it's high carb, whether it's low carb, whether it's vegan, whatever the hell it is, if we haven't established some sound principles there, then people tend to default to their old habits. Yeah, and they tend to go back to overeating. And again, I'm not saying that that's the case with you, but this has been my observation around fasting. The recent low carb Denver, I've had nervousness also around fasting to some degree, and this is tough. On the one hand, we as a society are definitely overfed, and we eat too much and we eat too frequently. So we should experience some degree of fasting that would help balance that stuff, like turning mTOR on, turning mTOR off, all that type of stuff. The flip side of this, though, and there was a doctor, an oncologist, and I'm blanking on her name now, but I've had some nervousness around really aggressive fasting because part of the goal within this story is autophagy, cellular turnover, stimulating apoptosis in abnormal cells. But the thing is that what constitutes abnormal, it's a range. It's not a binary point. And so she made the case that overly aggressive fasting will burn through the stem cell pool and that you will end up dying early. And this has been established in animals, where they intermittent fast these animals and they end up with organ failure because of the Hayflick limit. It's a term that describes the notion that in general mammalian cells can replicate about 50 times. Each time they replicate, they lose a little bit of the telomeres, and once the telomeres are gone, the cells don't really replicate anymore. They become senescent and they're done. And if you burn through all your stem cell pool, you don't have anything left to replace that. So the balance in my mind that we're trying to strike in this case, if we're looking at a longevity play, is you want cells to actually hang out as long as they can, so long as they're healthy. Then once they get into that unhealthy state, which again is a spectrum, not a binary point, then we kick them over the edge with some sort of autophagic process. Lifting weights, coffee, some degree of intermittent fasting or time-restricted feeding. Peter Attia makes the case that human metabolism is much slower than animal metabolism, so we may need some longer periods of fasting to be able to get the same type of benefits that animals do. So maybe autophagy and exercise don't quite work exactly the same in humans. I think we still need to figure some of that stuff out, but we do know that exercise and just simply not overeating is a net win. Like, people tend to live really well and fairly long lives in that story. So, you know, whether or not you should do a fasting regimen, again, I think that some sort of a time-restricted feeding, like, you know, eat breakfast at 8 or 9 and wrap up dinner at 4 or 5, like that seems totally reasonable. Maybe once a month you do a workout on a Saturday morning and you fast until Monday morning, and in between those couple of days you do a couple of other strength training sessions to maintain muscle mass. But I still just kind of default to, like, find a good eating regimen that you can more or less run the rest of your life with. Like, focus on that as a baseline, because people are reasonably successful at losing weight. They're just more successful at regaining weight. And the real challenge there is finding something that is sustainable over a lifetime. And I just don't know if the ping-ponging back and forth between weight gain and fasting is really doing folks any type of benefits. Maybe it's better than just gaining weight, you know, spiraling out of control. But this is one thing that Lane Norton made a case on the Joe Rogan podcast, which was that when people lose weight and regain weight, when they go to lose weight the next time, it is significantly harder. Like, we had a question around metabolic set point in the last podcast, and it appears that metabolic set point kind of ingrains harder because the body is kind of like, fuck that, we're not, you know, scarcity is kind of the thing that we're the most concerned about. And so it's almost like it digs the metabolic heels in to make the process harder to lose weight subsequently. So the point there is that I would just focus on what is going to be long-term sustainable. And I've just seen so much success with some sort of a ketones type approach. Lift weights 3 to 4 days a week, be generally active, introduce a mild caloric deficit. If somebody really wants to goose fat loss and maintain body composition, I think a protein-sparing modified fast, PSMF, is incredibly powerful. It's working via different mechanisms than a straight-up fast with regards to protein intake, but I would argue that it's better for a body recomposition perspective. So, man, I don't know that I've got a really specific, concrete answer out of this, other than I would encourage you to just noodle on what is the thing that you can do that is going to be long-term sustainable, like over decades, and use some iteration of that as your home base, your core, and then kind of iterate from there.
Okay. Let's see, our next question is from Rob on too high of ketones. Rob says, "Hi, Robb and Nicki. I've been really enjoying this Q&A podcast format. I have a question I'd like to hear your thoughts on regarding blood beta-hydroxybutyrate testing. I've been hearing many people in the field saying that the more fat keto adapted you are, the lower your blood BHB tends to be due to increased metabolic efficiency. Personally, I've been doing keto for many years now, sensibly, following the targeted protein requirement first, then adding in fat for the remaining fuel, as my goal is weight maintenance, not weight loss. I've never tested my blood BHB or urine ketones, just using the Ketones to test my breath ketones, which always shows that I'm in ketosis. Recently, just for curiosity's sake, I got my hands on blood BHB testing, and my fasted morning readings average between 1.5 to 2 millimolar. Plus, my recent urine test also shows elevated ketones, 60 milligrams per deciliter, which I wasn't expecting, as I thought urine ketones are only present in the beginning phase of the diet. So now I'm wondering, is this normal and desirable, or is it too high for someone who's been doing keto for years? Does this mean that I'm still not metabolically efficient after all these years? I know you always prioritize how one looks, feels, and performs, but still I can't help but wonder, especially since the concept of the higher the ketones, the better has never made much sense to me. So yes, to put it simply, I'm asking, are my ketones too high? Thank you for your great work."
Man, it's a really good question, and it's a better question than my answer is going to be. We've just noticed that a lot of folks over time, when they're on a ketogenic diet, that their ketones tend to trend down. And this has been something that Doctors Finney and Volek even more recently have kind of acknowledged and provided some airplay to, because originally they had their like optimum ketone level that was like that 1 to 2 range. And then we had all these people that were really succeeding on a ketogenic diet, particularly out of the Ketogains community, and their blood ketone levels weren't anywhere remotely like that in general, not across the board. So people who eat a little more protein, like if they eat at the higher end of the Ketogains recommendations, will generally have a little bit lower ketone levels. And this isn't because protein turns into chocolate cake. It's because protein can get degraded into an oxaloacetate substrate intermediate that can facilitate the beta oxidation of fats. And so we don't need as much ketones in that context. If more of the body's tissue shift to direct fatty acid mobilization, then we may not need as high of ketone levels. So it's possible you may have a gene polymorphism that you don't use fatty acids as directly, and you may still rely more on higher ketone levels. I really don't know. That's honestly a bit of a guess, but we see a pretty good spectrum in this story, and this is where the testing becomes challenging, because we have someone like you that's motoring along well, doing great, but the levels are, like Luis rarely gets above like 0.4, occasionally 0.6, and he's been ketotic for like 20 years. So that's just kind of where he has settled out. Mine are similar. Like I have to do some pretty heroic stuff to be able to get to higher ketone levels. When we were doing it with you, you ended up testing pretty high. But it's interesting, Nikki's pretty metabolically flexible. She goes in and out of ketosis. She doesn't really feel different one way or the other cognitively. It doesn't seem to impact your performance. You don't really suffer the keto flu. So I don't know. Like I wish I had a better answer than that, but I really don't know. But I will say that the folks who test low and then feel like they're missing out on something and then default to eating the fat bombs and doing additional calories just to goose the ketone levels up, or they suppress protein intake to get the ketone levels up. I don't know that that's a net win over the course of time. If you have a neurological condition, if there's some specific medical condition that we're wanting to affect with the ketone levels, then that's a different case. But in general, for like good body composition, basic performance and whatnot. It sounds like you're motoring along well, and you asked a great question, and that's kind of the best answer I could sling out there on it.
Okay. I think that was our last question for this episode.
Cool.
Yeah. Guess it's time to go grab the kiddos from school.
I guess we can do that. Thank you guys for your questions. Keep firing them off to us. Definitely tune in for 10 and 2. Follow me at Das Rob Wolf on Instagram. And we'll
and everything goes on YouTube as well. So
everything goes on the YouTube channel. Yep.
All right.
Take care, guys.
Thanks, guys.